First Oberon, then Cultria. Now the Faeries as a whole. Man, LB6 has a lot of things to go over, doesn't it? For a while now, I have been meaning to make a video about the Faeries from Lostbelts 6 from FGO. More specifically, I wanted to make a Morgan video, but I think a video about the Faeries will work better. Don't worry, I will go over Morgan as well. The Faeries of Lostbelts 6 have always been incredibly interesting. Honestly, some of the most interesting fantasy races that I can think of. And their wonder comes from their lack of humanity. This is going to be an interesting video, so let's just start quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on the intro. FGO is a gacha game, honestly more of a visual novel. It's about a time-traveling organization called Chaldea, trying to fix the main timeline called Proper Human History, PHH for short. That is the very, very basic summary of FGO. There's more to it, but that's basically what it's about. And every single storyline centers around one main theme that represents the game as a whole. Humanity. What makes someone human? What defines human? The true nature of humanity, even the worth of humanity. That is the main theme of FGO, and FGO explores the concept of humanity better than pretty much anything else. And one of the ways of exploring what humanity is to find out what it isn't. And FGO has two main species, or races, or whatever, of people that straight up lack humanity. There might be more that I'm not remembering, but these are the main two. Goetia and the LB6 Faeries. I've already made a video about Goetia and the importance of mortality, so you can just go check that out. I'm sure it still holds up. Goetia's great, but this video is not going to be about him. This video is about the Faeries from Fae Britain. Like Goetia, Faeries lack humanity in a fundamental way. But while Goetia eventually found his humanity, the Fae Britain Faeries just weren't meant to. Not really. Before I can actually talk about the LB6 Faeries, I need to do a whole lot of exposition. In FGO, there are these things called singularities. A singularity is basically a point in time which has been tempered with. For example, someone goes to the past or sends something to the past which tempers with the timeline, and that puts PHH, Proper Human History, at risk. Those points in history become singularities. And then you have Lostbelts, LBs for short. Chaldea, the protagonists of the game, travel to the past to fix those singularities, in part 1 at least. In part 2 we get the Lostbelts. Lostbelts are basically super singularities, whereas in a singularity you have to fix the timeline at the conception of its problem. In Lostbelts you have to erase the history that has been birthed from those singularities. This isn't a completely correct explanation, and it's more complicated than that, but in essence, that's what a Lostbelt is. For example, Xin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, manages to find the secret to immortality. Now, over 2,000 years later, the world has become a full-on history, completely separate from proper human history. There are a few quirks to Lostbelts though. For one, for a Lostbelt to emerge, proper human history has to be bleached first, essentially erased. And as long as Lostbelts exists, proper human history can't be recovered. Which is why the main goal of part 2 of Faith Go is to genocide all these different timelines. And as for the other point, every Lostbelt is a dead end. Basically, the reason why Lostbelts aren't the main timeline, aka proper human history, is because in them, humanity is incapable of progressing. There is no future left for them, at least not one that the world would consider worthwhile. Whether it's because humanity has basically become cattle, or because they have lost their agency, Lostbelts are dead ends to humanity, which leads us to LB6. Right? Well, not exactly. LB6 is quite different from every other Lost Belt, in that it is not a Lost Belt, but a Lost World. In LB6 there exists only one landmass, Fae Britain, and in Fae Britain, it's not humans that are at the top of the species hierarchy, but fairies. The world of LB6 revolves around fairies, not humans. Because of that, the fact that humans are incapable of progress is not important in any way to the world. It's the land of the Fae, not humans. Basically, LB6 is so far removed from proper human history that it isn't just a lost belt, but a lost world, with a completely different set of mystical laws. Now, why does this distinction matter? Sure, it's obvious why Lostbelts and Lostworlds are different, but is that really important? Actually, yes. Unlike Lostbelts, Lostworlds do not pose any threat to proper human history. A lost world can coexist alongside proper human history. It's called proper human history, not proper history. And once Caldea figures that distinction out, they decide not to destroy LB6, because, you know, they wanted fairy friends. Which finally leads us to this video about the fairies of Fae Britain, and how, even though they possessed no threat to humanity, they still all died, erased out of existence like every other Lost Belt. Not because they got in the way of recovering proper human history, but because of their nature and their incompatibility with humanity. Throughout this video, I want you to keep a few things in mind. Fairies are innocent yet cruel. They're like children. Fairies also like to pretend a lot. And lastly, despite how much fairies like to pretend, they lack humanity. For most, maybe all, fairies, seeing something from the viewpoint of someone else is impossible. They simply do not have the function of empathy. Keep these things in mind as I go through the history of Fae Britain. So, in Fate Go, all gods used to exist. From Greek to Indian to whatever. All the gods used to be around. There were a few events that completely removed the gods from Earth, ending the Age of Gods. The three main points in history that led to the end of the Age of Gods are the attack of Safar from 1400 years ago, Gilgamesh's refusal to cooperate with the gods, and Solomon's surrender of his rings. The important event here is the Safar one. Basically, 1400 years ago, an alien threat decided to wipe out the entirety of Earth. Stick with me, Fate is wild. Safar was the entity that was meant to destroy all life on Earth. Normally, due to this attack, the gods of Earth would get weakened, leaving only the other forms of life to defend the Earth. And the thing that drives Safar away is the Excalibur, wielded by some unknown swordsman. If Excalibur didn't exist, all life would get annihilated. Normally, that's how the events play out. But, here's the thing. Excalibur was made by fairies, and being that this point in the timeline is the divergent point leading to LB6, I'm sure you can all guess what went wrong. In LB6, the fairies didn't create Excalibur, which ended the world and eventually led to the creation of Fae Britain. So, why did the fairies not create Excalibur in this timeline? Well, because they were bored. They decided to procrastinate and play around for one day. They wanted to make the sword tomorrow. So, Earth without Excalibur is left completely helpless against Safar and loses all of its life forms. And not just life forms, but landmass as well, becoming an endless ocean. All because the fairies decided to play around. Funny thing is, the fairies were actually left completely unharmed. These 6 fairies lived in Avalon, which basically exists in another dimension. So, after a whole day of playing around, they went back to the overworld and saw that nothing was left other than the ocean. Whoops. Mistakes happen. Anyway, the 6 fairies just sort of existed for a while before a god that had fled to Avalon appeared before them alongside a priestess. This god was a Celtic god of wildness, fertility, and a peaceful god of nature and fruitfulness, aka Cernunnos. As far as we know, Cernunnos was the only god that actually retreated into Avalon. And so, after Cernunnos and his priestess came into contact with the fairies, they became friends and simply hung out. At first, Cernunnos was meant to punish the 6 fairies for being screw-ups, but being the gentle, kind soul it was, it decided to rehabilitate them instead. But after a while, the fairies were getting sick of the ocean, and somehow this was Cernunnos' fault, according to the fairies. If he was stronger, he could make land. But no, he was a weakling. Not only that, but they also hated the priestess. She just kept telling them to behave or get their acts together, such a killjoy. But there was a way they could get a lot of land. So, they poisoned Cernunnos, killed him, and made his corpse into land. Still, it would be boring with just them around. Thankfully, the priestess was there, but they needed more humans than just one. So, they cut her up into many pieces to make more humans. To make this process more efficient, they were very careful when cutting her up and casted a spell on her to make sure that she wouldn't die no matter what. The humans in Fae Britain cannot reproduce and can only live for around 30 years. This is why. Every human in Fae Britain is simply a genetic clone made from Cernunnos' priestess. So, yeah. That's the first thing that happens in Fae history. This is technically lost history, but still, it's what happened. Oopsie. History in Fae Britain is simple. Just like proper human history, they have BC and AD. Both just have different names. Fae era for BC and the era of the High Queen for AD. For example, everything with Safar and Cernunnos happened in Fae era 1200. Another thing to note is that there are multiple types of Fae. Not all are similar. The 6 fairies who got silly were A-ray fairies. Basically, super powerful fairies that can spawn other fairies purely by existing. So, once Cernunnos died and his body became land, normal fairies started popping up due to the presence of the A-ray fairies. With that and the humans that the A-rays created, civilization was slowly forming again. Again, fairies are unlike humans. They don't reproduce. They don't really have parents or siblings, they just spawn naturally if conditions are met. Some can take the roles of parents or siblings, but it's rare, and more of a cultural thing they got from humans that the A-rays knew of. Fairies can live for pretty much ever, but they can still die. Fairies are also incredibly fond of humans, which is why the A-rays made sure to carefully make as many as possible. Humans are full of culture and imagination, which fairies sort of lack. While the Fae are intelligent, they are pretenders more than anything. Basically, the fairies can't really come up with concepts or ideas and can only learn from others. They don't need imagination to live, but they find that kind of thing incredibly fun. They don't even understand the meanings behind the things they copy. For example, in one of the Fae cities, there is a grand cathedral, but the Fae do not worship any gods, so that grand cathedral is there for roleplay, pretty much. They also naturally like humans because, I don't know, pheromones? Being around a human makes fairies more happy, like a drug. So, all the humans in Fae Britain are slaves and toys to the fairies. Now, there are a couple differences between proper human history fairies and LB6 fairies. You see, Normally, fairies are secretive and people don't see them. They don't approach human civilization or even interact with humanity all that much. They have Faeries, which are eyes that show them the truths of the world. Basically, lie detector eyes. But in LB6, after thousands of years, eventually the fairies lost their Faeries because of how much they pretended, lied, in their lives, and how much they reveled in it. They lost their Faeries, like how we will eventually lose out on our pinky toes. Another thing is that normally when a fairy dies, they become nature. Same thing happens in Faerie. Fairies die and become land, a bigger playground for other fairies. And slowly, they even cover the body of Cernunnos, bearing that sin. However, if a fairy in Faerie loses their purpose, they become a Morse, which is basically a purple blob of waste and aggression. Because of the fact that the 6 fairies were meant to create Excalibur and didn't fulfill their purpose, the world itself punished all fairies so that if they lose their purpose while they are alive, they become Moors. Moors are lethal to fairies and can only be combated by humans and very powerful fairies. If a Moors even touches a fairy, that fairy will also become Moors. It's like a lethal game of tag. And because the fairies of Faerie have to copy everything that humans do, they also copied races. Basically, there are 6 fairy clans that exist in Faerie. The Wind Clan, Elves, the Earth Clan, Dwarves, the Fang Clan, Furries, the Mirror Clan, Fortune Tellers, the Wind Clan, Tinkerbell, and the Rain Clan. Who knows, lol. There's also the King Clan, but that's a special case. Lastly, there is one other group of fairies that are important, the Fairies of Paradise. Basically, because the world itself hates Faekind because of their great sin, it does everything it can to screw with them. The Fairies of Paradise are fairies that are directly dispatched from Avalon for 2 reasons. 1, to make the 6 Ares admit their guilt, and 2, to become a vessel for Excalibur, making that cursed sword once and for all. Fairies of Paradise are very different from other fairies in that they grow, and are immune to Moors and iron, and overall possess more humanity. Now that I've gone over some of their quirks of these cretins, let's go over some more of their history. You see, when they killed Cernunnos, he didn't actually die. Contrary to popular belief, people don't die when they are killed. Basically, after they killed him, he decided to curse all of Faerie. Every 100 years, he would summon a calamity. Every 1,000 years, he would summon a great calamity. These calamities had only one purpose: to spite fairies. These calamities are pretty versatile and can be many things, from deadly creatures to infighting. They could be anything. The Morse curse might also be his doing, but I'm not sure. So, because of these calamities, Faekind die in waves. Even the A-rays are capable of dying, 2 of which died during the first Great Calamity in Fae Era 1100. The thing with A-rays is that every now and then, a fairy that is born inherits the powers of the previous A-ray. Until that happens, the corpse of an A-ray becomes a bell, meant to be wronged by the Fairy of Paradise. So, at all times, there are 6 A-rays in Faerie. Kind of, I guess. Not really. This pattern of calamity and death continues for quite a while, until Fae Era 4000, when we get introduced to a very important character, Morgan Le Fay. In proper human history, she was the freaky sister of Arthur, but in LB6, Morgan is almost pretty much an entirely different entity due to the differences between proper human history and Faerie. As a Fairy of Paradise, she first washed up north of Faerie, in the territory of the Rain Clan. There, she was raised by the head of the Rain Clan until the fairies got bored and decided to kill every Rain Clan member, with Morgan barely scraping by. I'm kidding, to an extent. They really did kill all the Rain Clans in order to kill Morgan, but not exactly because they were bored. They did it for a few reasons. For one, Morgan wasn't a local. She was born on Paradise, or Avalon. She wasn't a native to Fae Britain, and this outsider could hold the most power in all of Fae Britain if she so wished. In a way, she was the heir of the land of the Fae, as the Fairy of Paradise. And for another thing, they didn't want to be judged. The reason why the Rain Clan was okay with her is because they believed in Paradise, so they nurtured her and tried to make a hero out of her. And because of that, one of the 6 clans got completely erased. And as far as I remember, in the story, we do not see a single Rain Clan fairy. After Morgan managed to run away, she started a journey in order to do what she was meant to do. She became Ash the Savior and started repelling calamities and great calamities as they came. For hundreds, no, thousands of years. The same process of clearing calamity after calamity. After every calamity, she would hide in a cave to rest for 20 years or so to recover. She was never thanked and never praised for her work. She knew the fairies. She knew that at some point the fairies would start blaming her for the calamities. Again, fairies are innocent, yet cruel. If you do something good for a fairy, they see it as your duty. So, if you don't help them again after helping them once, they will come to hate you. This isn't a matter of morality, good or evil. It's a matter of difference in what they would consider common sense. If it's not your duty, why would you do something? If it's not my duty, why should I do something for you? Fairies don't have that inherent empathy that humans do. Sure, they might understand the pragmatism behind some actions, but not the emotional reasons. That is not to say that fairies aren't emotional. They are very emotional. Just... okay, this is getting long-winded. Let's think about it like this. Humans, as a species, are rather paradoxical. We are social and form packs. We thrive in communities and our genetic code is written towards that. And to work together, us humans need to understand each other and be good at expressing ourselves. If we aren't good at basic communication, didn't have empathy and didn't have an attraction towards social gatherings, we wouldn't be where we are now. Sure, not everyone has empathy, literally. Empathy isn't the one thing that makes us human, it's one of multiple. Like, for example, that's the fact that despite being such social creatures, us humans are also very individualistic. The closest species that exists in this world with similar social structures as humans are ants. But ants do not have the same individuality that people do. Humans have ideals and wants. Humans don't want more for their society, they want more for themselves. Human colonies don't make one singular hive mind. Each have their own desires and goals. This is going to be a wild swerve, but this is the reason why total communism has never and will never work. Communism is built on the foundation that everything belongs to everyone. No one owns anything, everything is owned by everyone. A belief like that simply can't work if everyone has individualism. Everyone has something different they want, and not only are people's desires and wants different, they are also built different. Some are taller, some are faster, some are stronger, some simply have less. And no matter what you do, some people, actually, most people will want more. Some people will always want to stand out. To make communism work, you have to get rid of the individuality that people possess. People aren't ants, they don't work for the sake of their colony. People work for themselves. If making the colony better makes their lives better, sure, they will strengthen the colony. But people will never put their colony above themselves and their beliefs. People aren't one single entity, they're a group of entities. And when I say that people work for themselves, I don't mean for their own needs or benefits, but their wants. Which is why people will still sacrifice parts of what they have for others. My point is that despite being social creatures, humans are individualistic. That is how we were made. Ignore the potential incompetent government. Even if the government distributed wealth correctly for total communism to work, it still wouldn't. Because again, humans aren't built for it. Communism might work for ants, but it won't work for humans. And in the same way, human ideals and beliefs might seem perfectly normal to humans, but they aren't for fairies. Humans work the way they do because they are built that way. Fairies only try to mimic humans. Because of that, they don't understand the intricacies that goes into a lot of human behavior. Fairies, from what I can understand myself, are purely individualistic, the opposite of ants. They're not meant to work together. They have no need to. They aren't truly designed that way. They can play together, have fun together, but they can't work as a single unit in the same way that humans can. Of course, while I say fairies, not all fairies are the same. The fairies of paradise are made intentionally more human for whatever reason. The King Clan fairies that appear later have nothing to do with the 6th A race and are Celtic fairies that, while similar, are slightly different from other fairies. Fairies don't live in a society, they simply roleplay and have fun. So, they don't really care about a system either. If it's not fun, they will abandon it. If it is to their slight benefit, they will not hesitate to kill their own. It's not about immorality. Fairies just work that way. So, just as humans cannot have communism, Fae cannot have a stable society. And all of that comes into play when... Wait, what was her name again? How did I get here? What happened? Right, Ash! How could I forget about her? During her travels, she had a few companions that helped her with the calamities around Fae Britain. Ector, which was an Earth Clan fairy, Todorod, which was a Wind Clan fairy, Rhynic, which was a Fang Clan fairy, Gremir, which was complicated and not a fairy, and a time-traveling Mash, which was a proper human history human. In LB6, whenever Nasu wants to expand on something, he just throws Mash into whatever she can fit. Surprisingly, none of Ash's friends were problematic. They all helped her and none of them were ever mean to her. They were her only support, the only ones who always respected her. That is all until Fae Era 400. Finally, she managed to reach a complete peace with the help of her friends and a human called Uther. They managed to unite all fairies to, hopefully, live through an everlasting peace. But the fairies, or more specifically, one Wind Clan fairy, had a different idea. This is Aurora, an A-ray. She is the queen bee, a Stacy. She has an obsession with being perfect. Not for the sake of being perfect, but for the sake of being treated as perfect. Above all, the kindest, the most beautiful, the most inspiring. She only has one goal, to be in the greatest spotlight at all times. So once Ash managed to bring peace to Fae Britain, and once the human king Uther was about to be crowned, she decided to secretly poison Uther and cause a revolution to completely overturn the peace that Ash had fought for over 3,000 years. No one knew that it was Aurora that incited the uprising, and that was good. Aurora didn't want to have any possible bad rep. If this uprising happened, it must have been the fault of Ash and Uther. They didn't work hard enough and were lazy. So the coronation completely fell over. This was the final straw for Ash. She abandoned her heroic name and became Morgan once and for all. She threw away her duty as well, abandoning her role as the Fairy of Paradise. She decided to do things the hard way. If the fairies were incompatible with peace, then they should simply be dominated and eventually eradicated. After the assassination of Uther, Ector went on to become a hermit blacksmith. Todorod left to wander. Grimir was unsummoned and Mash was encased in ice up in the north to be saved by Chaldea. Rhynek also just did his own things, I guess. Which leads us to Fae Era 1. A great calamity almost completely purged Fae Britain, and with Ash nowhere to stop it, until Morgan came, and using the immense amount of mana that Tree of Emptiness, which establishes Lostbelts, but not needed for Lost World, she creates the current Fae Britain, and starts the era of the High Queen, conquering all of Fae Britain to rule over it. Now, there is a question that you must have by now. As the Fairy of Paradise, if she continued to fight over 3,000 years, why did she not judge the fairies in all that time? Why did she not create Excalibur? Well, every Lostbelt has a cryptor. Cryptors are basically people from proper human history that watch over Lostbelts in order to grow them into worlds capable of rivaling proper human history. It's a whole thing unrelated to this video. At first, when Beryl Gut, the one in charge of Fae Britain, came to England, the whole place was deserted. There was no one and nothing. All the cryptors must summon a servant of their own. So he summoned his servant as well, which turned out to be Proper Human History Morgan. After that, Proper Human History Morgan sent her memories back in time to Lost World Morgan, which showed ALB Morgan proper human history and the current state of Britain. Because of that, ALB Morgan forsook her quest given to her by Avalon and tried to do things her way, which led to, well, Era of the High Queen. Proper Human History Morgan disappeared, having lost all of her mana. So, basically, if Morgan had actually completed her quest as planned, all fairies would have died. Little did she know she would come to hate the fairies herself. Morgan has always only ever wanted one thing: to rule over a kingdom. Just like her Proper Human History version, her goal is simple: use everything in Fae Britain as fuel to completely get rid of Proper Human History and establish Fae Britain as the one true history. The calamities, the fairies, everything would be used for this singular goal. All of her people would die, but that's fine. Fairies always pop out in due time. Her subjects didn't matter, only her kingdom did. If she had to kill everything in Fae Britain to solidify her kingdom, she would gladly do so. Even so, one fairy in particular stood out to her, a fairy that went by Babon Shif. She was always a kind and hopeful fairy, inspiring, always got bullied and got into trouble. Despite her hatred, she still cared for that fairy and adopted her as her daughter. After all, when a cold ruler adopts a weakness, what's the worst that could happen? Now, there are several fairies that you could point to and say that they exhibit traits of morality. One of them is Mike. Mike is an Earthland barkeep that the gang meets near the beginning of the story. Until we meet her again, Da Vinci stays with him working as a waitress. Mike gives the gang rooms to sleep in and generally is a nice guy. He gets pretty inspired by Da Vinci, which he dubs Da Vinci, expressing that she lit a light in his rather boring life. He likes inventing and Da Vinci helps him with that. Near the end of the Lostbelt, when the entirety of Fae Britain is burning down, Da Vinci needs to go back to the bar in order to retrieve something. Mike gets excited and wants to tell her about all the things he did, until she tells him that she needs to leave. That internally angers him. It puts him into rage, giving him bad thoughts. He loved Da Vinci. He didn't want her to go. He wanted to possess her, to keep her in his bar, to make more things with her, invent new inventions. He wanted her. He needed her. All for one moment. Before he smiles at her and lets her go. The Da Vinci he likes isn't someone to be tied down. She is carefree and adventurous. If he kept her locked, she wouldn't be the Da Vinci that inspired them. Now, you might think that this is him overcoming his nature as a fairy, but it's not. It's simply him coming into a realization. He knew what he liked. It was only common sense, mathematical. He liked the cheerful, free Da Vinci. If she wasn't free, then he wouldn't like her. 1 minus 1 equals 0, and that 0 didn't hold much interest to him. This doesn't make him any less of a goat. I'm just saying that this moment isn't about a fairy becoming human. It's just an expected behavior of a smart fairy. While fairies generally don't have empathy, they can be pragmatic, and this is basically that. Another fae that is an anomaly is Ector. After everything that happened with Uther, Ector became a hermit, becoming a blacksmith in the outskirts of Tintagel. More importantly, he hated fairies. Even so, he was a respected blacksmith that eventually even the queen started commissioning. He lived a normal life until the 2010s, when he met a certain young girl that goes by Altria, the new fairy of paradise. I have made a 2-hour-long video about this devil, so go watch that if you want to know more about her. Complicated character I won't go over in this video. But basically, after Morgan fully forsook her duty, Avalon sent Altria into Faerie in order to do what Ash refused to do. After Ector and Altria met, he instantly knew that she must be a fairy of paradise. Ector was a grumpy old man, and Altria was a stubborn brat. So they quickly got along. Ector taught Altria a lot and was kind of a foster grandfather to her. Though, despite his fame as a great blacksmith, the fairies of Tintagel feared him because he was a hermit and weird, which is why they sent Altria to kill him because she was close to him. Again, go watch my Altria video for more context. Of course, she tried to pretend to kill him, but she was stalked by one of her fae friends, which told everyone what happened, which caused the whole village to go after her and imprison her. They called Woodwose, oh I will go over him, to have him execute her. This is another point of reference for the difference between fairies and humans. Altria was always hated and bullied in Tintagel, but because she had a prophecy about her, she was special. So, even though her life was horrible and objectively worse than a lot of other people's, some were still envious of her, because despite everything, she was treated as special. Good or bad didn't matter to fairies. What matters is strong reactions. That's it. Now, funny thing is, Tintagel was a poor village. Despite fairies not needing to eat, they wanted to eat, and they didn't have much food. So the fairies started killing each other in order to lower the number of mouths they needed to feed. Before Woodwose even got there, shocked by this development, Woodwose decides to kill every fairy in Tintagel because one of them had to be the fairy of paradise, and Morgan wanted that fairy dead. Before that happens, Ector saves Altria, escaping Tintagel with her. But as soon as they get away, Ector tells Altria to keep running. He lies to her that he will just go back to his forge, before remembering that fairies of paradise have fae eyes, which means that they see through lies. He was dying, and just didn't want her to know. And after telling her not to give up, he does die, leaving Altria all alone. Ector exhibits traits of empathy. That is not something I can just gloss over. Yes, you can say that he's also like Mike, but he goes a bit further than even Mike. Him and Todorot, which I don't feel like covering, are the two normal fairies that actually feel more human than fairy. It's not outright stated, but most likely Ash was Ector's greatest regret. his dear friend became the cold queen of Faeries, all because of fairies. Because of that, he hates fairies and he helped Altria, which was a fairy of paradise, like Ash. He saw Ash in Altria and wanted Altria to succeed where Ash couldn't. So he gave his life for that duty, which is important to all fairies now that I think about it. Now we can go over the two fairies that I really want to talk about, Woodwose and Boggart. These two characters are basically complete opposites. They both want to be what the other person is so badly. Let's first talk about them through the timeline. In around 1000, the Great Calamity was an entity called the Morse King. This Morse King went on to kill Rhynek, which was the Aerie of the Fang clan. Soon after, the next Fang clan Aerie was born and killed the Morse King. That Aerie was none other than Woodwose. Woodwose continued getting stronger and more famous under the rule of the Queen. He was always very loyal to her and did whatever she told him. And once Boggart was born, him and Woodwose became two of the strongest fighters of Faeries, defeating countless Moors just by themselves. Because of that, Woodwose became the ruler of Oxford, while Boggart became the ruler of Norwich. But at some point, because of someone who drifted from proper human history, literally just backrooms into Faeries, Boggart lost his rule over Norwich and eventually built a new base in Sheffield. After a fight between Boggart and Woodwose, Woodwose was made into the new Fang clan leader. Apparently, Boggart lost because one of his Fae lovers drained him, but either way, Woodwose became the Fang clan leader, which puts us to where the story started. Let's talk about Boggart first. Boggart holds no love for the Queen. He has a vision, and he wants to overthrow the Queen. A plot point in the game is that Norwich is in danger because of a calamity, but Morgan doesn't want to do anything about it. Boggart wants to use that indifference of hers to gather allies and eventually take over as the king of Faeries. The thing with him is that despite his cruel exterior, he's a very popular ruler and his people trust him. Sheffield is the only place in Faeries where you can't treat humans as slaves. His excuse is that because he and his people all got kicked out of Norwich, they are all on the same level, human or fairy. We first meet him when an amnesiac Mash is kind of sold to him, something like that. And so, he tells her that because of her strength and beauty, he will take her as his 62nd wife. And Mash just kind of goes with it, like, she just accepts that. And while Boggart does have 62 wives, we don't see them, but they're all probably human. He doesn't like having Fae wives because they're liars, which I guess fair, all fairies do like to pretend, I guess. Every time he talks, he makes sure to put on an air of authority. He wants to be feared, to be a wild ruler, which is exactly what he is not. Despite how much he tries to be ruthless, he is one of the most empathetic fairies in Faeries. Every time he talks to Mash, it's clear that he can understand her, more so than even she can understand herself, because, you know, she has amnesia. For example, he can understand why Mash avoids her black barrel more so than even herself. At one point, he asks her why she isn't afraid of him, and she tells him that from what she has gathered, 100 years ago, Sheffield was a complete wreck, and now it's a very colorful city that is extremely comfortable to live in, with people that like their ruler. Again, despite how much he wants to be wild, he is rational. Boggart's story ends when Morgan decides to send all of her military to stop him from building his army. There was no way he was winning this fight. So, out of desperation, he picks up Mash's black barrel and starts firing it towards his enemies. And the black barrel was strong. Even if it wasn't made for him to use, he was still capable of firing the cannon a good few times. Troops were dying. Sheffield was burning. and so were his enemies. Finally, he was the wild, powerful, fierce, ruthless ruler he always tried to be. He knew that Mash probably knew how to use the Black Barrel better, so he told her to use it. But then she asked him why she had to destroy such a beautiful world. After that, he told her that he has no use for cowards and told her to run away. He kept firing the Black Barrel, too occupied to even realize that the Black Barrel was killing him, using his energy as fuel. But even as he was firing, he was growing more and more aware of what he was. He simply wasn't a scary, terrifying warmonger. He never could be. He gets ambushed by Beryl and Bob-on-Shit, obligated, and starts getting tortured by them before getting saved by Mash. But by that point, Mash had already fought some of Morgan's troops, so she was tired. Boggart carried her to the rear gate before ordering all of his subjects to run. Sheffield got razed to the ground, while Boggart and whoever survived managed to reach a cave that he had prepared in case of an emergency. It wasn't until he calmed down that he realized that while he did hate the Queen and a lot of other fairies, most of all, he cared about his people. He wanted to be a good ruler. Most of all, he wanted to have Norwich back. He had missed that town, his hometown. And despite always pretending, he was always just a soft ruler, even until he died. It's not about his nature, but also his wants. It was only after everything that he realized that he didn't actually want to be a ruthless ruler. He was just trying to be a good ruler, and in his mind, a good ruler was a wild and ruthless ruler. So, he pretended to be just that, a tyrant, one that was actually quite beloved by his people. He was too rational in his actions and his emotions were just lagging behind. Either way, he died with slight regret, only wishing that he could have understood Mash just a bit better. But what if the opposite? Woodwose is someone that hates humans. He doesn't want to take care of them at all. To him, humans are a waste of resource. I think one thing that really stands out when looking at Boggart and Woodwose is that when we see Boggart in a compromising state and he gets approached by a human, he just tells the human to go away and not talk about what he saw. With Woodwose, when he gets approached by a human giving him stressful intel, he just kills the human for no reason. Still, despite being a wolf, I think, he tries to have manners and mostly eats vegan food. He has restaurants all over the place for this exact reason. He always wanted to be the leader of the Fang clan, and after becoming a leader, one of his insecurities was his rather beastly nature. Everything he does to combat that. He tries to act like a dignified, clean aristocrat. He's also rather enamored by women. Whenever a clean female character gives him attention, he becomes like a dog. He likes Morgan, and he also likes Aurora. At one point in the story, Woodwose gets an order to go destroy all the rebels in Londinium. Basically, the rebels were split in two, and if Woodwose attacked Londinium, he could get ambushed from behind by another group of rebels. Morgan promised to help him with extra troops to stall the second wave of rebels until Woodwose captured Londinium. And if those Londinium troops got stalled, Londinium would definitely fall. But after a long and hard-fought battle, the reinforcements that Morgan was meant to send never arrived. Actually, the second wave of rebels didn't even come across any of the Queen's soldiers, and so Woodwose has no choice but to join the fight himself and eventually lose to the rebel army, forced into a humiliating retreat. You see, Woodwose is really easy to manipulate. Before his fight, he went and talked with Aurora. Something you need to know is that Morgan took Beryl as her husband because of sarcasm, kind of. No one knows why she did it, but everyone knows that the two are married. Being that Woodwose really liked Morgan himself, He was pretty gutted about that. In his talk with Aurora, she told him that the queen must have changed. Despite how much Aurora herself liked Woodwose, she knew that Woodwose should have been the true king of Fae Britain, alongside Morgan. That's what he deserved. Even so, he wasn't chosen by Morgan. Because of that, and some trash talking he took from Beryl after his defeat, Woodwose came to despise Morgan. Now let's make a few things clear. For one, Morgan did send reinforcements to help Woodwose. It's just that those troops were unknowingly taken out in a conspiracy involving Fae Britain's greatest calamity, Vortigern. I have made a full video about him, so I won't talk about him here. And for another thing, Aurora does not like Woodwose, not in that way. Aurora doesn't want to reciprocate his possible feelings at all. She just wants to be loved by him and be his number one. She wants to be everyone's number one. Woodwose is simply no different. After getting abused by Beryl some more, Woodwose is left completely alone and presumed dead. Until the final battle with Morgan, we see a few scenes of him simply crawling towards Camelot, cursing his queen. Morgan was insanely powerful and capable of cloning herself dozens of times to combat the Chaldeans. There was no path to victory until she got ambushed by a crazed Woodwose. Before actually doing anything, he asks her why she didn't send him troops in this fight against Londinium, to which she tells him that she did. But what she didn't know is that when Woodwose had talked to Aurora prior, she had told him that if troops don't show up in his upcoming fight and Morgan says that she sent them, she is lying, and that her goal all along would be to get rid of him and his Fang clan. Again, Woodwose is easily manipulated, especially by women. After that, he jumps her, brutally injuring her. He had been loyal to her for years, for all his 1,000 years of life, and even more. He loved her ever since he was Rhynek. And yet, she never loved him or even cared about him. He starts mauling her, filled with rage and savagery, the things he tried to abandon. But even so, she didn't fight back. Despite her hatred for fairies, she probably had a soft spot for a few, like Woodwose. Maybe it's because of the fact that Woodwose was Rhynek's quote-unquote son, or because Woodwose was just that loyal and likable, but she couldn't hate him. It's only after she caresses his fur that he finally comes to his senses. All too late. She did always care for him and love him. Maybe not in the way that he wanted her to, but she still did. She cared for him immensely. It was just that her cold attitude hid that. Despite everything, despite wanting to kill all fairies for her goal, Morgan couldn't completely abandon her love and hope, remnant of her days as Ash. After crying for a bit more, Woodwose dies in the arms of his queen. Morgan wasn't dead, but she was gravely injured. She could still fight and was about to, before getting ambushed by Spirigan and Aurora's troops. Normally, the troops would stand no chance against her, but they used her weakness. Her daughter, Baobon Ship. Again, she never managed to abandon her love and hope. She couldn't fight back, and died, schizored by the fairies in her court. You see, Morgan never cared about the fairies. She always just cared about Britain itself. Britain was all that she was, it was her everything. Even so, she needed subjects. The thing is, in Fae Era 1, she killed every single fairy alive. Afterwards, using the magical energy from the Tree of Emptiness, she revived all those fairies, but also put a command spell on them to tax them of their magical energy periodically. After Aurora revealed that, and also put out a bunch of slander, like blaming Morgan for the death of Uther, the fairies killed Morgan in delight. Morgan's dream was simply not compatible with fairies. She wanted to create a kingdom, rule a civilization. But fairies are simply not civilized creatures. The only reason that they are is because they are copying humans. It's fun. Otherwise, they don't actually understand society itself. And so, Morgan's story ends here. As for Woodwose, he's just like Boggart. Whereas Boggart could never become a full-on savage ruler, Woodwose could never throw away his savagery. They are two sides of the same coin. They want to be what the other one is, without knowing that they just aren't compatible with each other's lifestyle. Boggart always unconsciously acted proper and never threatening. The only time he did, he regretted it before dying. Woodwose was always simple. Despite making restaurants and dressing up fancy, he was always too easily swayed by his emotions. Woodwose knows what he is and hates it. He's just like an abusive workaholic husband who cries out for abusing his wife. Unlike an abusive husband, what Woodwose is just in his nature. Maybe he could control his feelings better. Maybe he could somehow learn to be manipulated less. Even so, he never could become a truly dignified gentleman. Because not only was he not meant for that, he didn't truly want to be that either. He only started acting less savage because he thought that it was only expected of a clan leader. And also, he did it to impress Morgan. He never did it for himself. So, I guess it's not his nature that he hated, but his inability to be loved by Morgan. And in the end, he realized that she always did love him. But by that point, he had no life left in him and turned into a morse, having abandoned his duty. But instead of attacking anything, he simply faded away, the burdens of his guilt and sorrow being too heavy for him to move. He died betraying someone that not only he loved, but someone that loved him. There are other fairies that I could talk about, like Ainzel, head of the Mirror Clan, Bob Shith, connected to Kernos' priestess somehow, Barghest, cursed by a calamity, Aknaria, the Celtic fairy, and Oberon, already made a whole video about him. Some of these characters I have already talked about in my Altria video, like Ainzel and Nock, and because I don't want this video to be too long, I want to finish up on one final fairy, Aurora. As I have already said, Aurora is the one that poisoned Uther, manipulated Woodwose, and eventually she poisoned Knocknaria, which was supposed to become the new ruler of Fae Britain after Morgan. It's not coincidence that the cathedral I talked about is in Salisbury, which she rules. Knowingly or unknowingly, she wanted to be worshipped as a goddess, to be the star of everyone, no matter the cost. She truly believed herself to be the best, and if someone was more popular than her, that they must be bad in some way. She never held any guilt over what she did, because as far as she was aware, she deserved everything. She is innocent and cruel, the definition of a fairy. As Vortigern puts it, the one most qualified to rule over Fae Britain is Aurora. Not because she's a great ruler, but because she's the perfect example of a fairy. A complete and utter pretender, to the point that she deceives even herself. In 1600, Aurora went north and found a disgusting creature that would later become Melusine. Melusine isn't a fairy, but Albion. Kind of, just like some kind of dragon. Aurora sees this as an opportunity and takes in and helps Melusine, despite how disgusting she was at the time, like a rotten corpse. She did this because it would make her seem kind. Kind equals good, good equals love. What Aurora didn't expect was for Melusine to become beautiful. Some would say, more beautiful than Aurora. Melusine eventually came to love Aurora, becoming her retainer. Even so, Aurora never cared about Melusine and actively talked behind her back. And Melusine knew of this. Even so, she still loved Aurora. Aurora always wanted more love. But near the end of the Lostbelt, all of Fae Britain started getting destroyed. So, she needed to find love and worship somewhere else. She needed to somehow break through into proper human history. But that was the one thing that Melusine didn't let her do. If Aurora ever broke into proper human history, she would not be loved. She would be hated. Unlike Faeries, proper human history wouldn't love her. They would criticize her. They would hate her. Maybe some would love her, but a lot would not. She would be slandered, despised, and called out for her hypocrisy. Humans don't like liars or pretenders, and pretending is all that Aurora is capable of. Aurora simply cannot survive in a world not ruled by the likes of fairies. As I've already said, humans possess great individuality, but that's not all that they have. Like fairies, humans also have unity. People can work together without the need to pretend. Humans don't band together solely for the sake of fun. They do it for survival. And Aurora only possesses individuality. She can't work in a group. She can't fit into humanity. And so, Melusine stabs Aurora before it's too late. Faeries was shattering. No one was going to survive. So, Aurora had to die now, while she's still beautiful, while she's still loved. Otherwise, Aurora's heart would break. And so, Aurora started slowly bleeding out, and was one of the final fairies of Faeries to actually die, having been gifted the most dignified death possible by her retainer, shining bright, just like she wanted. Despite the fact that Chaldea didn't have to kill any fairies for the sake of proper human history, none were left alive, all because of their sheer incompatibility. Fairies from Fate Go make up probably my favorite fantasy race. What makes them so good is that they're just not human. They aren't humans with quirks, they're a different species entirely. People always confuse race with culture, and here, it's not the fake culture that makes them so different, it's their very existence. I think fairies are especially good because of the fact that they fit into the overall theme of humanity that FGO explores. FGO has always been about humanity, even its antagonists. From Goetia to Kristaria to Oberon, every antagonist's goal directly concerns humanity as a whole. Honestly, I could probably bring up Beryl in this video as well, but while he's very connected to the fairies, I would have to go over quite a bit of exposition to actually talk about him. Of course, you also have Ritzka, which is the human. The protagonist that represents what humanity is best. Definitely the best gacha game protagonist. I'm honestly not sure how this video turned out, because writing it felt like such a fever dream for some reason. I have probably done some things wrong, and there will be some things that you will not agree with me on, but still, I think there is value in this video. At first, this was supposed to be a Morgan video, before I actually started working on it and decided to make it about fairies overall. This is my third and final LB6 video, hopefully. I don't see how I could talk about anything else here. If you want to know more about the story, you can watch my Altrio and Oberon videos. They have a lot of things I didn't go over here, like quite a bit. Like, subscribe, dislike, give me engagements. I still haven't read LB7 as of writing this script, so I have to read that. So, until next time, I don't have a joke.